So for those that are new here, this is as I mentioned that just came in. This is modeled after the when I was at Cornell, a graduate student, there was a system seminar class. It was every Friday at 12 p.m. Natasha was actually part of it as well, Neil, and it was very fond memories of it because it was a great opportunity for people to show off their latest research. Usually, we had external guests from other universities. They would come and present their research, sometimes internal as well. So this will be like a virtual version of that. Going forwards, not today, I guess, because we didn't have the time to put it together, but going forwards, we will have lunch served via Uber Eats for everybody that joins this call. The format is straightforward. I'll make the introduction for the latest guest. We'll open up to the guests to present their work. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. Ask any questions related to the research that you may want. And then it should just really be a fun time, focused very much on research, very much on the latest things, systems building, of course, as is relevant to the work that we do. So consensus protocols, virtual machines, all the kind of latest research that we may be interested in. And that's kind of like the point of it. So thank you all for coming. So we have Neil from UC Berkeley, PhD candidate. He works with Natasha, who actually was my well, she wasn't a student at Cornell, but we used to work together back at Cornell when I was a graduate student, and she was a student of Lorenzo Visi from UT Austin, and it was just we kept in touch a little bit, but I saw the latest work that she did with BeeGees consensus, and I said, hey, amazing paper. I read it over last weekend. This has got to be produced, shown to the rest of the engineering team here at Ava Labs. And then she said, "Well, actually, I have the brains behind it. It's not me. It's Neil." So I said, "Neil, please, I definitely want to have you here." So Neil, thank you so much for coming. I'll open it up to you. Introduce yourself, and the rest of the team will introduce themselves at the end when they ask questions. But pretty much almost everyone here, as far as I can tell, is engineering on the Ava Labs side. I believe it's pretty much everyone, just engineering people on the Ava
That's
Labs
correct.
side.
We only opened it up to engineering
Perfect. Yeah. So it's just all technical people, from platform engineering to data and all that stuff. So it should be a good crowd. But Neil, I'll open up to you. Feel free to introduce yourself and present, and we'll take it from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. Yeah, let me, oh shoot, okay. Let me share my screen for a second. All right, are you guys able to see my screen or no?
Yes.
You are. Okay, perfect. So thanks again, Kevin, for the introduction. So just to restate, I'm Neil Giridharan. I'm a third-year PhD student at UC Berkeley, advised by Natasha Crooks. And today I'm excited to talk to you all about BeeGees, which is about how to stay alive in chain BFT protocols. And this is a joint work with my collaborators Itai, Natasha, Heidi, and Florian, who's also actually a PhD student at Cornell. Okay, so before I get into the meat of the work, I want to sort of set the stage of Byzantine fault-tolerant protocols, and specifically in the academic sphere. So around 2019, there was this paper called Hot Stuff, which shout out to Ted Yin, who I know works at Ava Labs, who basically came up, who was the lead author of this protocol called Hot Stuff, which was one of the first, I'd say, BFT protocols that was specifically designed to work in these blockchain setting. And this protocol specifically kicked off, I would say, this new family of what I'll refer to as chain BFT protocols. And there's been many follow-up works in the academic space to this Hot Stuff protocol. So there's recently the Stoltian and Ditto paper, which takes the ideas of Hot Stuff and tries to improve the latency of it with a different view change mechanism. There's also been this Fast Hot Stuff paper, which does some very similar optimizations as well. I even have another paper in this family which looks at using some new signature schemes to try to improve these protocols. And I think this has been capped off recently with this paper called Marlin, which tries to achieve the best of all latency, throughput, and responsiveness. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you in the academic space that these BFT protocols have been receiving a lot of attention, but I'm sure you guys need no introduction to know that in industry as well, these Byzantine fault-tolerant protocols have seen a new resurgence. So specifically, the new Ethereum uses this protocol called Casper FFG, which is in this sort of chain BFT hot stuff family of protocols. The Diem blockchain, which was Facebook's original blockchain project, was actually using the hot stuff protocol. And recently, there's been blockchains like Cello and Aptos, which is kind of the successor to the Diem blockchain, which have been using these chain BFT protocols. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that these protocols have become more popular in the blockchain space. So you may be wondering, okay, why is this? What are some of the nice properties they give you? So the first thing I'm going to say is fairness. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about the order fairness or like MEV mitigation work that's been done by others, but specifically just splitting up the responsibility of proposing blocks among like all the set of replicas, rather than having sort of one replica dominating the block proposal responsibility. And the second nice property is, I would say, throughput. So previous BFT protocols, the ones that were developed in the 80s and 90s, were kind of designed for settings where you would maybe have a few replicas, maybe a dozen at most. But with blockchains now, we're really trying to have these protocols scale to a larger number of replicas. Okay, so that's kind of the rosy picture of chain BFT, but I'm here to tell you that they actually have one massive flaw. And you may be wondering, okay, how bad could this massive flaw be? I'm sure that if it's popular, it can't be that bad. Well, I'll say is that the latency of these protocols is normally around 4 network round trips, more or less, which you may be thinking is not too bad. However, exploiting this flaw can actually lead to an average latency of 12 round trips. So that's already, I'd say, pretty bad. It's like 3x worse in just the average case. However, it gets even worse. So we basically, I'll show you later that you can get a worst case latency of 129 round trips by exploiting this flaw. And so that's like really bad, but it gets even worse. In some configurations, you can just have a latency of infinity. So you may never be able to commit. And if that wasn't bad enough, the kicker is that actually exploiting this flaw only requires crash failures. So you don't need any kind of fancy Byzantine failures, equivocation, people like deviating from the protocol in crazy ways. It just requires nodes to just crash, which is something that you would think that these BFT protocols should be able to handle well.
And Neil, sorry to interrupt, but this also applies to Casper's protocol?
So yes. So the specific configurations will change for Casper specifically, because they also have this separate block proposal mechanism. But if you were to take the Casper protocol as is without this, then yes, it would be susceptible. Okay, so you may be wondering, okay, what is this flaw and what causes it? So you're going to have to tune in to find out more. But before I can get into the flaw, I'm going to sort of give you some background and sort of assumptions we make. So for our system model, we're going to make pretty standard BFT assumptions that many of these popular protocols all make. So we're going to namely assume that in our system, we have a set of n equals 3f plus 1 replicas, where f is the number of faulty replicas. And for our network assumption, we're going to assume a partial synchrony network model. So what this means is that the system can behave asynchronously for some amount of time. And then there's this unknown time called GST, for which after GST, the network behaves synchronously, which just means that messages that are sent are guaranteed to arrive within some known parameter delta. And we're also going to assume a public key infrastructure, which we use for digital signatures. And specifically for the problem we're looking at, the formal name for it is BFT state machine replication. And with this, we kind of have a log or chain of blocks or commands. And I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with this, but we're going to assume that we have a block tree, which can have forks. However, the goal is to basically agree on one single linear chain of blocks, where potentially we have conflicting blocks here, but we want to be able to agree on one linear sequence of blocks. And so, yeah. So I'm going to give a quick background on how these chain BFT protocols work. So how they typically work is I'm going to introduce a notion of views. And with the view, we're going to assume that for every view, there's sort of a designated leader for that view. And that leader is going to drive the execution of the protocol. And typically, the assignment of views to leaders can happen in some round robin type fashion, but that is not too important. So what's going to happen is the leader, for example, here in view 1, is going to propose some new block or some value, in which case is A. It's going to send it to all of the other replicas. And I just want to make a quick note here is that we actually, at this point, for all these pirate chain BFT protocols, they actually do not store the proposal message of A, or actually their votes too. So they simply, just upon receiving a block, will check the validity of it and send their vote, indicating that they support this proposal to actually the next leader. So this is another key difference, is that you'll kind of notice here is that the leader of view 1, the first replica, actually does not receive the votes. Everyone sends their votes to the second leader. Now, a key ingredient of all of these protocols is what's called a quorum certificate, or QC, which indicates that n-f people have voted for a particular proposal. So we're basically in the prepare phase. Once the second leader receives n-f votes, it will form a prepare QC, and we're going to represent this by this key here. Now, an important property of the prepare phase is that it actually ensures what we call non-equivocation. Now, what I mean is that if you were to suppose that this first leader was Byzantine and try to propose maybe A to some replicas and some other value, maybe Z to a different set of replicas, actually only one of these proposals can, at most one of these proposals can have a QC that forms for it. And this follows from the quorum intersection property. So essentially, two quorums of n-f have to intersect in at least one honest replica, which you are guaranteed will only vote for one of these proposals in a given view. Okay, so that was the prepare phase, which is the first phase. Now we're going to talk about the pre-commit phase, which happens afterwards. So continuing where we left off from the prepare phase, the second leader will take the QC that it formed from the previous phase, send it to all the replicas. And I'm going to note here that at this point, all the replicas actually store the n-f votes for A at this point, because it has this non-equivocation guarantee. So upon receiving this QC, the replicas will send their vote to the next leader, in which case is the third replica. And like before, the replica will form a quorum certificate in the pre-commit phase, which indicates that n-f people have received this prepare QC and have voted for it. And finally, the third phase is the commit phase. And in this case, the third leader is going to take the pre-commit QC it received in the previous phase. It's going to send it to all the replicas. The replicas will again store this new quorum certificate that was formed. Replicas will vote, send their votes to the next leader. And the next leader will form a commit quorum certificate, which indicates that n-f people have voted for the pre-commit QC. And the important thing here is at this point, once you have this commit QC, it is safe to commit this value A, and you can basically proceed to have the next leader propose a new value.
So if I can I ask a question?
Yeah,
So
go for it.
just for, I guess, maybe clarification here, when you say phases, you're talking about the views here. They're used interchangeably. Like in a more classical setting, you would say phase, like there's a view, which really indicates like the time when a particular leader exists. And a leader may actually do multiple things in that time, but in the chain version, what you're doing is that you're effectively changing the view, you're changing the leader after every single round.
Right,
and
exactly.
calling it a phase. Got it. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect way of describing it. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So that's kind of the basic version of chain BFT. But all these protocols actually have a very important optimization called pipelining. And this optimization is very important for how they're actually able to get nice throughput. So you'll kind of, I'll walk you through an example here. So kind of as before, we're just going to take it from scratch again. We have the first leader. First leader proposes, again, this value A. They send their votes to the second leader. Now, if you remember that I said that a prepare quorum certificate forms for A. Now, instead of just only sending this QC for A, the second leader is actually going to start a new consensus instance for a different proposal, in this case B. So effectively, what's happening is that the second leader is not only going to start the pre-commit phase for A, but also the prepare phase for B. And since these phases kind of have an identical structure where you have the leader that sends to all the replicas vote and send to the next leader, we can essentially reuse the messages for multiple of these consensus instances. So in this case, we're going to pipeline this proposal B, the prepare phase for B on top of the pre-commit phase for A. We're again going to store this quorum certificate for A here. The replicas will vote. And now this third leader is going to again pipeline a new consensus instance for proposal C. And so we're going to have the prepare phase for C also be the pre-commit phase for B, which is also the commit phase for A. And again, illustrating, we're going to store the quorum certificate for B here. We're going to send all your votes. And at this point, once you have the QC for C, you actually are able to commit A. And upon a replica receiving this, they can commit A and proceed. So with this pipelining optimization, we have something called the commit rule, which is when is it safe to actually commit a particular value. So you'll notice here we had these QCs for A, for B, and for C. And crucially, they were in contiguous views. So you'll notice, like in this example, they were for views 1, 2, and 3. And this is going to be very important for what I show you later on. Okay, so I showed you sort of the normal case when there was no failures and everything was good. However, these chain BFT protocols also have a view change mechanism, which is used to replace faulty leaders. So you can imagine that suppose we have a scenario again here where the second replica is faulty. The first leader sends his proposal to everyone. Everyone sends their votes, in this case to the second leader. And we're just going to assume that this leader just crashes. They just fails to make progress after receiving all these votes. Then what will happen is that all of the other replicas will time out after some time from not hearing from this leader, and they will elect a new leader to sort of carry out the protocol from then out. So this is called a view change, where, and in this case, the third leader is next up, it's elected, and everyone will actually send their latest QC to the new leader, who is responsible for making sure that safety and liveness is preserved from what happened previously. So this new leader will receive these QCs, in this case, this QC for A, and this new leader will pose a block B that extends this block A and continue the protocol from there. Okay, so now I think we have enough background to talk about where this massive flaw comes from. And I'm going to basically show you that it comes from this undesirable characteristic, which we call consecutive honest leaders. So I kind of told you that two of the main techniques that these protocols use is pipelining and this very frequent leader rotation. So we're sort of rotating the leader after just a single proposal message is being sent. But the combination of these two leads to this consecutive honest leaders characteristic. And what does this exactly mean is that commitment is guaranteed only after 4 consecutive honest leaders are elected in a row. Okay, so it may be helpful to see why is this actually a problem. So let's kind of walk you through a potential example here. So maybe first we have an honest leader that's elected. We have another honest leader that's elected that carries out the protocol. We have a third honest leader, and then we run into a faulty leader. And so we can't commit here because we need 4 consecutive honest leaders. So we continue. And even though here, when we elect a 4th honest leader, we actually can't commit. We have to restart the whole process of trying to commit a particular block because we ran into this faulty leader. And so we actually have to continue again, elect another honest leader, another honest leader, and then we can run into a faulty leader again. And this can just keep happening. And you can imagine we have to maybe run through a whole bunch of leaders before we can actually commit. And remember specifically, I told you that we were assuming that n equals 3f plus 1. So maybe like almost a third of these replicas are faulty. So this is not like some crazy scenario where you need, like all the replicas to be faulty. So you can imagine where you can get it, in scenarios where this situation actually happens. And we wanted to sort of quantify this to really see the effects of it. So what we did is we basically wrote this Python simulation to count the number of attempts it took to actually satisfy this CHL property with the 100 replicas. So what we did is we constructed a round robin leader schedule, which is pretty typical for these protocols. We picked 33 randomly of these replicas to be faulty. And we basically counted the number of times it took in order to reach a sequence of 4 consecutive honest leaders. And if we did reach a sequence of 4 consecutive honest leaders, we would terminate, and then we would count the number of attempts. And yeah, so to show you our results here is that we found that in the average case, it took around 12 attempts or 12 views in order to actually commit a command. And in the worst case, it took 129 tries. And we didn't simulate this for enough times where you could show sort of the infinite latency, but you can imagine where if you have a scenario where you just have 3 honest, a faulty, 3 honest, a faulty, 3 honest, a faulty, that can happen indefinitely, and you'll just never be able to commit. Okay, so I'm sure all of you are thinking at this point, why don't we just use non-consecutive leaders? It seems like that would just solve our problem. And yeah, we can just avoid this whole situation to begin with. Well, to answer that question, I'm going to have to revisit the commit rule again. So remember what I was telling you before is that to commit, we basically need to have these 3 QCs. So we have these 3 QCs that all reference A. However, if we have non-consecutive leaders, it actually means that these QCs can be in non-consecutive views. So in this case, maybe they're in views 1, 4, and 7. And the crucial thing is that there can be gaps. Because they're in non-consecutive views, there can be gaps in between where we can actually have QCs for blocks that conflict form. So maybe we have this block X, which was proposed in view 2, and a QC forms for that, which conflicts with A. And maybe a QC for Y, which extends X, forms in view 6. And this happens in view 9 as well. And then the question becomes, okay, we said we have these 3 QCs in non-consecutive views. We should commit A, but we also have it for X as well in views 2, 6, and 9. So, I mean, do you commit A? Do you commit X? I mean, there's been prior work that try to do this, and you can actually show that it leads to a safety violation if you just try to do this naively. So this is where I'm going to introduce our protocol BeeGees. And BeeGees is actually able to have this non-consecutive leader commitments, but does so in a safe manner. So specifically, it satisfies this property called AHL, any honest leaders, which says that commitment is guaranteed after 3 honest leaders are elected, and not necessarily consecutive. Now, you'll notice here I said 3 instead of 4, and this is sort of like a nice bonus that we get from sort of the protocol that we have, is so we're actually able to reduce the number of honest leaders to 3. And we're able to do so while also maintaining the nice good properties of chain BFT. So namely this pipelining and this frequent rotation. Okay, so here's kind of a demonstration of AHL, or any honest leaders in action. So if we illustrate the scenario before, now if we have an honest leader that's selected, another honest leader that's selected, if we run into a faulty, we actually don't have to restart at this point. We can use the progress that we made earlier, and once we reach our 3rd honest leader, like, we're safe to commit. So we don't have to go through the process of restarting again. So what's the key idea behind this? And the key idea for BeeGees is to look at something that was previously mostly ignored by these prior BFT protocols, which is the proposal messages. So if you kind of remember in the prepare phase, I said that these proposal messages were actually not stored. The proposal messages and the votes for them were not stored, and you really only stored the QCs that formed. But our insight is that if we look at these proposal messages and actually store them, then we can use that extra information to allow us to be able to safely deal with the challenges of trying to commit with non-consecutive honest leaders. So let me get into the specific challenges, which the first one is, how do you actually deal with QCs for conflicting blocks that happen in the gap, which I showed you earlier. So in an ideal case, we would just be able to prevent them from even forming. So it'd be nice to basically say, okay, if a QC forms in this view, then I'm guaranteed that no other QC for a conflicting block in a later view can form. And we actually showed that it's possible to do that when you have only omission failures, or if there's asynchrony. So we can actually prevent conflicting QCs from forming, which is fantastic. However, that's not the full story. Unfortunately, we cannot always prevent conflicting QCs from forming, because if that were the case, then we could actually just reach consensus after we form a single QC, which is actually not possible. So under equivocation failures, we can actually detect the formation of the conflicting QCs reliably. And we can use that information to essentially have everyone agree to abort committing that block because it was proposed by a Byzantine party. So really the key insight here is to distinguish between these failure types, which weren't really a common technique in these chain BFT protocols prior. Okay, so to kind of illustrate what I mean here, I'm going to show an example with omission failures. So again, if you remember that a QC, a quorum certificate, consists of n minus f votes for a particular proposal. So here for A. So I basically know that if a QC formed for this value A, n minus f replicas must have voted for it. And so furthermore, in the view change, so basically in any future view, I know that the new leader contacts a quorum of n-f replicas. And we can use the properties of quorum intersection to basically show that, okay, if there's a quorum certificate, I know there's n-f replicas that voted for it. I know that any quorum in the view change must contain n-f replicas. And so the new leader is basically guaranteed to always see at least one proposal and vote for A in the view change. And so this basically allows the leader to pick A. And so you don't get this scenario where maybe this leader doesn't see A and it proposes a conflicting block. It's actually guaranteed to see this proposal for A, and it can basically extend it, which prevents conflicting QCs from forming by using this quorum intersection idea. Now let's kind of look at the more complicated case with equivocation. So again, taking our example here where there's a quorum certificate for A. And what can happen though is that if the leader who proposed A was Byzantine faulty and maybe sent conflicting proposals in the same view, is that in the view change, we are guaranteed to see this proposal message for A, but we may actually also see this proposal message for X that conflicts with A. And this kind of raises the question of like, what do we actually pick? Like, we actually don't have, like, here I'm showing you that a QC formed for A, but it's indistinguishable actually from maybe a QC forming for X, and there may be just only one proposal message for A. So the leader can actually use this information that it receives a proposal message for X and a proposal message for A as a proof of equivocation. So because specifically these proposal messages are signed, we actually have proof that this leader behaved maliciously, because as part of the protocol rules, you're only allowed to propose one block per view. And here we have clear evidence here that's showing that a party actually proposed conflicting blocks. And so this equivocation proof basically it allows you to reliably detect that, okay, maybe in this case, the leader does pick wrong and it picks to choose to extend X instead of A, even though a QC for A formed. However, everyone will receive this equivocation proof for the leader who proposed A and X, and will be able to basically abort committing if in fact you were trying to commit A later on. So that was the first challenge, is how to deal with conflicting QCs. The second major challenge we ran into is how do you actually ensure that blocks proposed by honest leaders are committed within a bounded time. So if you remember, this AHL property said that after 3 honest leaders, even if they're non-consecutive, the block has to be committed. So let me kind of illustrate what I mean by this challenge. So if we take example here again, where the first replica is the leader and the second replica is Byzantine faulty, what can happen is the first replica, the leader, sends the proposal A to all the other replicas. They send their votes to the next leader, who's faulty, and a QC forms, okay? But it's only formed at this faulty replica. So no one else has this QC for A. You'll notice that all the other replicas have the proposal messages for A, which is fine, but no one actually has the QC. Now, again, what can happen is we can time out again because we have a faulty leader, and a view change occurs, and we're actually only guaranteed to see the proposal message for A. Like, the new leader is only guaranteed to see the proposal message for A and the associated vote. It's not actually guaranteed to see the QC. And because it's only guaranteed to see this proposal message A, we kind of lost the work of the first honest leader. So like, we kind of have to, again, redo the step of trying to form this QC for A, even though the first honest leader already did that work. So the fact that we had the second faulty leader essentially prevent the dissemination of this QC means that the future honest leader has to sort of redo that work, which is a problem because we can maybe continually run into the scenario where we have an honest leader, a faulty leader, an honest leader, and a faulty leader, and then we never end up actually committing a block. Okay, and so again, you have to restart. So our solution here is a technique we call QC materialization, which is, again, leverages the idea of the proposal messages and their votes, and specifically from all of the honest replicas. So the technique's a bit in depth, so I'm going to leave the details to section 4.2 in the paper, but I'm happy to maybe go over it offline if you're all interested. Okay, so kind of after coming up with these BeeGees protocol and examining it, we kind of, in order to deeply understand it, we kind of asked ourselves the question, why, like what makes BeeGees unique? And why was it able to achieve this AHL property while other protocols were not? Like, is there something fundamental here that we're missing? And when designing this protocol, we actually came up with this property called sequentiality, which says that after GST, when the network is synchronous, in other words, if an honest leader proposes a block B, then all future honest leaders must actually propose a block that extends B. And this was kind of the missing piece that other protocols did not have, because it was very common for, you had an honest leader that would propose a block, then you have a faulty leader afterward that just crashes, and then that honest leader that follows it actually has no idea of what happened previously, and so you just would not be able to make progress. So to kind of illustrate this, how we're actually able to satisfy sequentiality in BeeGees is by leveraging these proposal messages again. So, if we have an honest leader after GST, then we're kind of guaranteed that all of the honest replicas are going to have seen this proposal, have voted for it, which means that when we have any kind of view change in a future view that happens afterwards, the new honest leader is guaranteed to see this A. Whereas previously, these protocols, the chain BFT protocols, only looked at QCs. And because they only looked at QCs, in this case, only the second faulty replica has the QC for A. And so they were not able to actually remember the proposals of prior honest leaders. So in our paper, we kind of show that this property sequentiality is fundamental for satisfying this AHL condition for committing when you have any sequence of honest leaders. And because these prior protocols did not satisfy sequentiality, it was basically impossible for them to have this stronger liveness property. So it kind of shows, yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump with a quick question, Neil? Well, it's not a question, but I guess to summarize really like previous chained BFT protocols, and I guess even like PBFT and all these other protocols, they never really worried about, like to them it was like just one, it could be multiple view changes, let's say with like hot stuff. Really end to end is just one round of trying to get a block committed. So they weren't like worried about whether a leader was going to be faulty. Just as long as you keep trying, eventually you're going to get force sequences of correct leaders to propose the block. Eventually you commit. So the idea here really is, what if you actually kept track of these like branches of multiple possible rounds forming at the same time of like potential QCs, right? Like in hot stuff, it was just like one QC, like one QC path. Like you have a blockchain A, and then you have B, and then you're trying for B, keep trying until you reach the finalization for B. But now you can actually create these extensions where you have A, B, and so on, or you have another fork of X, Y, and you're keeping track by adding information about like the view number that you're in. And that kind of creates like a chain of not just the blocks, but also creates a chain of the view numbers. So that if you you can actually make progress. That's like if you have a skip between A and B, potentially X and Y are making progress in the view changes because you're keeping track of these view numbers, and now you can actually make progress in the X and Y versus the A and B path. Is that like the gist of it? Like you're basically keeping track of not just the pointers to the blocks, but you're keeping track of pointers to views, previous views, effectively.
Right. So I think it's a very similar vein. So I think most of these prior protocols, they actually store the view numbers in the block. So like you do actually have this information about the view numbers in these blocks or QCs, but you're kind of getting on the track here where these prior protocols really did not keep track of potentially equivocating or forked block proposals. Right. So that's fundamental. And the reason they didn't is because it was not necessary for safety.
Right.
Because for safety, you only know something could have committed if there exists a QC. So there was like no point in storing these potentially equivocating proposals because like they weren't buying you anything previously. Right.
That's a beautiful insight. Yeah. So okay. And I haven't read actually I read the paper up until the protocol specification. I think section 4, I forget what section that is, maybe section 5. I assume in the paper you guys add like this ability to keep track of these view changes per like block path. Is there a particular line in the pseudocode where you can actually see this change from hot stuff?
Yeah, so we actually find that you only actually need to store the highest. So you only actually need to store the highest potentially equivocating or like proposal message. You don't need to store like all the potential ones. And yeah, you should be able to see that.
Oh, I see. I see. So you just store the highest. Oh, I see. And they weren't doing this in hot stuff because they're not because they assume it's just like one path until it commits. I see. I see. That's interesting. Okay, I'll look at the algo. Sorry to interrupt. I don't want to mean
no, perfect. Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, so just to kind of summarize the sequentiality here is that we actually show in our paper that the sequentiality is necessary for having this any honest leaders property, and because prior protocols did not satisfy sequentiality, then it's actually impossible without serious modifications to like actually have them satisfy this property. So it's very fundamental to design the protocols in such a way that you can satisfy the sequentiality property. I can't. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now I kind of want to get into some more simulation results. So what we did was to kind of quantify this even further is we simulated the number of attempts it took to satisfy this consecutive honest leaders like condition and this AHL condition with 100 replicas. And so we kind of have a few different things we're comparing. So the first thing is CHL3, which is you just need 3 consecutive honest leaders in a row to guarantee commitment. And this is necessary for the Jolteon protocol. We have CHL4, which is 4 consecutive honest leaders, which you need for hot stuff. And then finally, we have AHL, which is you just need 3 honest leaders, and they don't have to be in consecutive views, which is for BeeGees. And similarly, we construct a round robin leader schedule, and we assign 33 random replicas in this round robin to be faulty. And we measure the average and worst case number of attempts to actually satisfy these 3 conditions. So here is sort of the results here, where HL is the green line, the blue line is CHL3, which is representing Jolteon, and the orange line is CHL4, which is hot stuff. And kind of gave you a sneak peek of the results, but for BeeGees, we basically get 4.5 round trips in the average case, compared to I showed you earlier, which was hot stuff, which took 12. And in the worst case up here, it takes us 18, but this is still much better than the 129 and potential infinite case for hot stuff. And so basically the simulation results show that under these failures, AHL is able to get 3 to 7x better latency compared to this hot stuff protocol. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap up. So hopefully I convinced you that these modern chain BFT protocols have these nice desirable properties of some better fairness, scalability. However, this comes at the cost of weaker liveness that can degrade performance. And BeeGees, our new protocol, strengthens liveness by satisfying this property called AHL, which allows any sequence of 3 honest leaders to commit, which mitigates that potential attack. The key insight of BeeGees is to use these proposal messages, which were previously mostly ignored by all these prior chain BFT protocols, and to basically leverage them to solve the 2 key challenges of dealing with conflicting QCs and also committing honest blocks. And this results in a 3 to 7x better performance according to our simulation compared to the state of the art. And yeah, if you're interested in learning more, feel free to check out the archive paper here at this QR code. And yeah, happy to take any questions now. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Neil. This was awesome. Yeah, I definitely will follow up more offline. It has a bunch of different things, but I want to open up the floor to anybody else that has any questions. I know, Patrick, you've been collecting a bunch of these questions in a doc.
So first off, before we do that, we did get the Uber Eats voucher working. So if anyone wants to order that,
amazing.
So I know that's everyone's primary concern for, but thank you, Neil, for coming. I thought it was, an awesome session, and I think a lot of people were pretty glued to this presentation. The people that asked questions ahead of time before this, put them just in the comments. So there are 2 here from Sam Kaufman. Sam, I'm not sure if those were previously answered. I think I see one here that we still had open. Maybe you'll kick us off.
Yeah, my first one he answered basically with the next slide, so that was good. But the next one, I don't think I saw an answer in it, which was when you were discussing the using the previous proposals for detection for the AHLs. What controls are there to stop a secondary proposal from a non-honest leader during the first view when there's no existing QCs or previous proposals?
So let me try to understand your question better. So are you saying that if you have a faulty leader that proposes some value, what is stopping them from having a QC forming? Is that the question?
During the first view, for the proposal, if 2 proposals came to the next leader as A and X, what would stop that?
Right. So yeah, nothing is stopping it. So you're right. So if you have a faulty leader, maybe the honest leader sees A and X in the previous view, but the key insight is that you actually you have proof that this leader is faulty, and which means that you don't actually need to commit that leader's block. So because you have this equivocation proof and you set it to everyone, if later on you do, you're maybe trying to commit either A or X, you're basically guaranteed everyone will see this equivocation proof because maybe a later QC forms, and everyone will sort of abort the block commitment there.
So I think the question, Neil, from Sam, if I understand it correctly, because we operate in the avalanche mode where during a window anybody can actually propose a block, totally valid, and then that will be taken for the next kind of round of processing. In chained BFT, this is not how this works. You actually have a deterministically set up leader for every single view change. You know who the next one is going to be. Everybody knows who the next one is going to be deterministically. So at view 1, in the example that he had 4 leaders. So you have the first leader, let's say it goes round robin, very simply. First leader proposes, proposes block A, gets the votes, and those votes have to go to the next deterministically known leader, which in this case is leader number 2, round robin. If leader number 3 proposes some other proposal and then sends it over to everybody else is going to be like, well, this is invalid because this is coming from a leader that is not supposed to be the leader at this point. So everybody else is that leader is completely faulty. So that will be completely dropped and ignored. And the only path forward is through leader 2, who is the leader for this round, for this view rather. And that leader can be faulty, in which case there is no progress, and then you have to do the view change. So you go into view 3 and so on. So does that answer the question, Sam?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kevin.
I had a quick question, and then I think Steven has one after me. He can't speak up because he's on a plane right now. So my question more so is, have you guys codified at all, like the minimum properties or contents that a proposal message must have to basically be compatible with this mechanism? And the reason why I asked that, right, is like if it's too loosely defined and the proposal message, let's say you need to revert it for some reason or like switch the proposal message, you would now probably cause everyone to get slashed if the mechanism has that because of the sequentiality property you added, right? So like in other mechanisms, if you needed to do a reset of the network for whatever reason, you could easily do that proposal switch and just assume that it was like a faulty leader, right? But with this mechanism, if everyone previously accepted it but the message itself is invalid, I guess I would assume that's kind of like outside of the context of this research. But I'm curious if you've thought about anything related to, codifying or like at least clarifying what exactly proposal messages should contain for people that are implementing it.
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. So I think definitely at a minimum, you need to have the leader sign the proposal. So that's like absolutely a key to basically being able to have these equivocation proofs is a signature from the leader indicating that it's proposing some value. And furthermore, in the view change, in order to get this property of having 3 non-consecutive, we actually, in the proposals, need to basically have references to the latest proposal that the N-F quorum of replicas. Okay, so basically in the view change, when the new leader contacts the N-F quorum of replicas to get their latest state, the new leader actually needs to send that information to in its proposal message to basically show that it's not behaving maliciously. So that's I would say the second main thing that needs to be in the proposal message. That's key. And then, yeah, in terms of like backwards compatibility and making sure that it's not invalid, I think that's, I would say, probably outside of the scope of this, and I'd say, yeah, more on an engineering implementation side.
Cool, thanks. I'll get Steven's question here now. I'll read that out for him. So is the reason why the worst case message complexity goes to O(n)², even with threshold messaging, because the proposal messages that need to be communicated aren't necessarily over the same message?
Yeah, so this kind of actually goes back to what I was just telling you. So the reason why it's still O(n)² is because we use essentially inside the proposal message that a leader sends, it needs to convey the highest proposal message that the N-F replicas have said. And so kind of like what Stephen was saying, if these highest proposal messages that everyone sends are not the same, then you can't use like sort of a threshold or like multi-signature scheme to compress it down. So yeah, that's true. This is like very similar if you guys know like BFT. It's considered O(n)² for precisely this reason. Is you kind of the leader kind of has to send all of the QCs it receives in the view change, which may be different. So that's where you get the n squared from.
Are there any other questions from anyone?
I have maybe a quick question, which is, can you quantify, I mean, if I understood correctly, we're storing all proposal messages. Is it possible to quantify what this means in terms of overhead per storage? Although in practice, let's assume that we don't have too many situations where the faulty situations occur, so it's in a way an optimal path. But if there are lots of error situations, then this might be more important.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So firstly, I'll say is that the replicas themselves, they only need to store the latest or the highest proposal message. So that's enough to sort of guarantee the properties of BeeGees. Now, I guess within a single proposal message, you're right that potentially you have references to earlier proposal messages, which themselves may have references to, again, earlier proposal messages. And this is where I think potentially this is like potentially a good use case for snarks could be. So instead of having to necessarily download potentially these n-f proposal messages to just ensure that the leader's proposal is valid, if you have like a short snark proof that basically says, okay, I basically out of these n-f messages, I picked the correct one to extend, then I think you can get some nice storage savings there.
Thanks.
Any other questions? We're just at time anyway.
I have a quick one, a last one to wrap it up. It's like,
Sure.
This paper is obviously extremely new. Have you already seen anybody attempt to implement it, or outside of the simulations you guys have? I don't know if you've shared those already yet.
Yeah, so good question. So yeah, this I would say it's probably too new for anyone else to have started implementing it or seeing it being used, but we're actually currently working on coming up with an implementation ourselves. So we're hoping to have that ready soon, and then yeah, we'll hopefully have some actual real results with that as well. But yeah, I think in terms of people looking at ideas, we've talked a little bit with the Ethereum Foundation a bit on basically applying this to Casper to basically justify non-consecutive epochs. So that's, I'd say, another place that I think who's potentially interested.
Are you implementing it in Go or some other language?
In Rust.
In Rust, okay. Cool. By the way, for the chaining stuff has existed even before hot stuff. What Avalanche actually does effectively chaining. The key difference is that Avalanche does not have a notion of use, but it's a different thing. In any case, we're just at time. Neil, thank you so much for the presentation. This was really, really awesome. Thank you all for the rest of the engineering team. So we'll be having this session every Friday. Again, it'll be consensus, VMs, all that kind of stuff, latest research that we can possibly find. Hopefully, we'll get you guys with some ability to do presentations internally, but for the most part, it will probably be external presentations. Regardless, it should be very, very fun. Thank you all. Neil, I'll stay in touch as well. I'll follow up. Actually, I have a few questions for you after this, but we'll stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin.
Absolutely. Thank you all and have a great Friday.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Yeah.